Imagine this. Within the span of just 50 years, a single human lifetime, nearly every major civilization around the Mediterranean Sea simply vanished. Not slowly, not gradually, but catastrophically. Palaces that had stood for centuries burned to the ground. Cities that bustled with tens of thousands of people fell silent, their streets emptied, their markets abandoned. Trade networks that connected 3 continents, from the British Isles to Afghanistan, broke apart like shattered glass. Writing systems that had documented the affairs of kings and kingdoms disappeared entirely. And the written word itself, the very foundation of what we call civilization, vanished for over 300 years. This wasn't a natural decline, the kind you might expect from aging empires. This wasn't a slow fade into obscurity. This was a systems collapse so complete, so devastating, that it plunged the known world into its first recorded dark age. Around 1200 BCE, something went catastrophically wrong in the Bronze Age world. The interconnected civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean experienced what modern scholars call a perfect storm. A cascading failure of such magnitude that it would take 3 centuries for civilization to recover. And here's what makes this story truly haunting, truly terrifying for us living in our own interconnected world. We still don't know exactly why it happened. Was it climate change? A prolonged megadrought that turned fertile lands into dust? Was it earthquakes? A seismic storm that toppled cities across fault lines? Was it the mysterious sea peoples, raiders whose very identity remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries? Or was it something more insidious? The very complexity and interdependence that made Bronze Age civilization so sophisticated also made it fatally vulnerable to collapse. Today, we're going to unravel one of history's greatest mysteries. We'll walk through the ruins of lost civilizations, read desperate letters written in the final hours before destruction, examine archaeological evidence baked into clay by the very fires that destroyed palaces, and explore the theories that might, just might, explain how an entire world came crashing down. This is the story of the Bronze Age collapse, a story of hubris and catastrophe, of interconnection and vulnerability, of civilization lost and eventually, painfully, rebuilt. Let's begin where all great mysteries begin, with what was lost. To understand the magnitude of what collapsed, we first need to understand what existed. Because what fell in 1200 BCE wasn't just a collection of scattered cities. It was an entire world. A sophisticated, interconnected, literate civilization that wouldn't be matched in scale and complexity for over 1,000 years. The Late Bronze Age, spanning roughly from 1500 to 1200 BCE, represented humanity's first truly globalized economy. This wasn't just trade between neighboring cities. This was an interconnected web of commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange, stretching from the gleaming pyramids of Egypt in the south to the fortress walls of Mycenaean Greece in the north, from the Hittite Empire in modern Turkey to the coastal trading cities of Syria and Lebanon. And they weren't just aware of each other, they depended on each other, desperately. Picture a marketplace in Ugarit, a cosmopolitan port city on the Syrian coast. Egyptian merchants haggle over the price of papyrus and gold. Cypriot traders offload copper ingots shaped like ox hides, each weighing 25 kilograms. Mycenaean ships arrive bearing fine pottery and olive oil. Hittite caravans bring silver and textiles. The air fills with languages: Egyptian, Akkadian, Hittite, Greek, all mixing together in the universal language of commerce. This was the Bronze Age world at its zenith. Sophisticated, literate, wealthy, and about to fall. At the apex of this world stood what historians call the Great Powers, a network of empires that maintained an uneasy peace through trade agreements, royal marriages, diplomatic correspondence, and the occasional war. Let's meet them. Egypt dominated the southern reaches of this world. Under the New Kingdom pharaohs, particularly during the long reign of Ramesses II, Egypt reached perhaps its greatest territorial extent. From Nubia deep in Africa to the borders of Hittite territory in modern Syria, Egyptian power was omnipresent. The temples at Karnak grew ever larger, monuments to Egyptian wealth and divine kingship. Egyptian gold was legendary, so pure that Babylonian kings wrote letters begging for more of it. Egyptian grain fed not just the Nile Valley, but traded north to feed other kingdoms. And Egyptian papyrus provided the writing material for the entire Mediterranean world. Moving north, we encounter the Hittite Empire, controlling the vast plateau of Anatolia, modern Turkey. Their capital, Hattusa, was a marvel of Bronze Age engineering. The city covered 165 hectares and housed approximately 40,000 people at its peak. Massive walls, some sections still standing today, enclosed a complex of temples, palaces, and administrative buildings. The Hittites were master metalworkers who had discovered the secrets of ironworking earlier than their neighbors, giving them a technological edge. Their archives, written in cuneiform on clay tablets, documented treaties with Egypt, military campaigns, religious festivals, and the constant challenge of feeding their population in a region prone to drought. Across the Aegean, the Mycenaean Greeks built their palace fortresses, Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, Thebes, or Komnenos. These weren't the classical Greeks of Plato and Pericles. These were the Bronze Age Greeks, the warriors and kings who may have inspired Homer's epics centuries later. Their palaces featured walls of such enormous limestone blocks that later Greeks believed only mythical giants called Cyclopes could have built them. Inside these citadels, scribes working by lamplight kept meticulous records in Linear B script, an early form of Greek writing, documenting everything from chariot inventories to religious offerings to the distribution of olive oil. And then there was Crete, where a sophisticated culture with deep Minoan roots continued to thrive, its palace at Knossos serving as a major center of administration and trade. Throughout Syria and the Levant, great cities flourished, Ugarit on the coast, a cosmopolitan trading hub where east met west, Alalak, Aleppo, Kotna, names that echo through history, and Cyprus, the great copper island whose very name derives from the metal that made it wealthy. These weren't isolated kingdoms. They were players in an international system, connected by treaties, trade, and royal correspondence. In 1887, an Egyptian peasant woman digging in the ruins of Akhetaten, the short-lived capital of Pharaoh Akhenaten, discovered something extraordinary: clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing system of Mesopotamia. These became known as the Amarna letters, and they give us an unprecedented window into Bronze Age diplomacy. Kings addressed each other as brother. They negotiated marriages between their children. They complained about the quality of gifts received. They requested gold, horses, beautiful women. A letter from the Babylonian king Bernaburius to Pharaoh Amenhotep III is almost comically mercenary. As for gold, send me a great deal of gold before your messenger comes in all haste this summer. Another letter reveals that when a pharaoh's daughter married into a foreign royal family, her new husband wrote asking for doctors, and Egypt obliged. But these letters also hint at problems: banditry, local rulers ignoring central authority, requests for military aid. The system was under strain, even at its height. Now here's where it gets fascinating and frightening. Bronze, the material that gave this age its name, is an alloy, 90% copper and 10% tin. It was harder than pure copper, easier to cast, and held a sharp edge better. It was the steel of its day, essential for everything from weapons to agricultural implements to cooking vessels. But there was a problem. Copper and tin almost never occur in the same location. Copper was relatively accessible. Cyprus, the copper island, produced enormous quantities. The mines at Ergani in southeastern Turkey had been worked since the 8th millennium BCE. There were deposits in Anatolia, in Sardinia, in the mountains of Greece. The Iberian Peninsula had copper. So did regions of the Alps. But tin? Tin was a nightmare. Tin deposits were rare and distant. The major sources lay in Cornwall and Devon in Britain, Brittany in France, parts of Spain and Portugal, the Erzgebirge Mountains on the Czech-German border, and, thousands of miles away, in Afghanistan and Central Asia. Think about what this means. To create the tools that sustained Bronze Age civilization, you needed a trade network stretching from the British Isles to Central Asia, over 4,000 miles. A Bronze Age shipwreck discovered off the coast of Turkey near Uluburun, dated to approximately 1300 BCE, carried over 300 copper ingots weighing 10 tons and approximately 40 tin ingots weighing 1 ton. These materials had traveled hundreds, perhaps thousands of miles before ending up together in a merchant's hold. Recent analysis of tin ingots found in Israel has revealed they came from Cornwall and Devon in Britain, direct evidence of maritime trade between the British Isles and the Levant during the Late Bronze Age. The tin that armed Hittite soldiers, that equipped Egyptian workshops, that furnished Mycenaean bronze smiths, much of it had traveled from foggy British coastlines across stormy seas and through multiple trading posts before reaching its destination. This wasn't just impressive, it was a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. All this wealth, all this trade, all this complexity, it was managed through what historians call the palace economy. Wealth flowed into centralized palace bureaucracies, was redistributed according to royal priorities, and supported an entire ecosystem of craftsmen, scribes, soldiers, priests, and administrators. At Pylos in southwestern Greece, we can see this system in action through the Linear B tablets discovered there. Approximately 1,000 Linear B tablets were found at Pylos, written by 32 different scribes. These tablets were not intended for long-term archival storage. They were administrative documents typically kept for at most a year, with frequent use of words like this year and last year. In normal circumstances, their contents would have been transferred to papyrus or other materials, and the tablets themselves discarded or recycled. But the fire that destroyed the palace around 1180 BCE accidentally baked these clay documents hard, preserving them for eternity. A catastrophe for the Bronze Age became an archaeological treasure for us. What do these tablets tell us? Everything. Lists of workers organized by occupation and location. Inventories of bronze allocated to smiths for making weapons and tools. Records of textiles issued to workers, assessments of religious offerings to various gods, detailed counts of livestock, sheep, goats, pigs, cattle, stores of grain, olive oil, and wine measured in standardized units. The Kingdom of Pylos controlled over 2,000 square kilometers divided into 2 administrative provinces. The tablets mention specific individuals, their occupations, their obligations. Han Tu, one of the senior scribes we can identify by his distinctive handwriting, recorded assessments of taxation and debts, allocations of bronze, and detailed inventories of palace property, including the famous tripod tablet listing various vessels used in ritual feasting, some described as being of Cretan workmanship. The same meticulous record-keeping existed across the Bronze Age world. The Hittites left thousands of cuneiform tablets documenting their laws, treaties, religious festivals, and administrative decisions. Egyptian hieroglyphic texts covered temple walls and papyrus scrolls. This was a literate civilization, and literacy meant control. This wasn't just about economics and administration. The Late Bronze Age produced stunning artistic achievements that wouldn't be equaled for centuries. At Ugarit, scribes developed one of the earliest alphabetic scripts, a crucial innovation that would influence the Phoenician alphabet and eventually the Greek alphabet and Latin script you're reading right now. Mycenaean frescoes depicted elaborate scenes, women in colorful dresses, nature scenes with dolphins and lilies, religious processions, bull-leaping ceremonies that echoed Minoan traditions. Egyptian tomb paintings from this era, particularly in the Valley of the Kings, are among the most beautiful and technically sophisticated ever created. The gold mask of Tutankhamun, who died around 1323 BCE, exemplifies the artistic mastery of New Kingdom Egypt. Hittite sculptors created impressive reliefs showing kings and gods. Craftsmen carved intricate ivory plaques depicting battle scenes, mythological creatures, and daily life. Metalworkers created elaborate gold and silver vessels, inlaid weapons, jewelry of breathtaking delicacy. Literature flourished. The Epic of Gilgamesh circulated in various versions. Egyptian love poetry was composed. Hittite myths and legends were recorded. While most of what survives is administrative or religious, we glimpse a culture that valued art, beauty, and story. In short, the world around 1200 BCE was prosperous, interconnected, literate, and sophisticated. The Bronze Age had reached its absolute zenith. Trade connected 3 continents. Diplomatic correspondence maintained an international order. Scribes recorded everything. Palaces controlled vast territories through bureaucratic efficiency. Art and architecture reached heights that wouldn't be matched for a millennium. And then, in less than 50 years, in a period shorter than a modern human's working career, almost all of it vanished. The palaces burned, the trade networks collapsed, the writing systems disappeared, the art stopped being made, the administrative machinery ground to a halt, populations plummeted, cities were abandoned. The Bronze Age world fell into darkness, and we still don't know exactly why. The first signs of trouble appeared around 1225 BCE. At first, they seemed like nothing unusual. Local conflicts, bad harvests, pirate raids along the coasts, minor disruptions to trade. The kind of problems that every age faces, every civilization weathers. But by 1200 BCE, something had gone catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. When archaeologists excavate Bronze Age sites across the eastern Mediterranean, they find something deeply disturbing, a layer of ash, destruction, and violent death dating to approximately 1200 BCE. Site after site after site shows the same pattern. Palaces burned, cities destroyed, bodies left unburied, and then abandonment. Let's walk through the wreckage. Ugarit, the great cosmopolitan trading city on the Syrian coast, met a particularly well-documented end. The city occupied a massive tell, an artificial mound created by millennia of human occupation, that rises 60 feet high and covers over 60 acres. French archaeologists excavating the site found the ruins of an immense palace complex with nearly 100 rooms, a testament to the city's wealth and importance. But they also found something more haunting: letters. When your messenger arrived, the army was humiliated and the city was sacked. Our food in the threshing floors was burnt and the vineyards were also destroyed. Our city is sacked. May you know it. May you know it. Another tablet contains an even more chilling message, a plea from the king of Ugarit to the king of Elashia, Cyprus. My father, behold, the enemy's ships came here. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Luca? Thus, the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us. These weren't routine letters about trade disputes or diplomatic protocols. These were final messages, written in the last hours or days before the city fell. The archaeological evidence confirms the tablet's testimony. Ugarit was utterly destroyed around 1190-1185 BCE. The city was never rebuilt. The site was abandoned, and the great trading hub of the Bronze Age became a ghost town, eventually buried under sand and forgotten for over 3,000 years. If Ugarit's end was dramatic, the fate of the Hittite Empire was even stranger. The Hittites, one of the great powers of the Bronze Age, equals to Egypt in military might and diplomatic prestige, simply vanished. Hattusa, their mighty capital, was burned and completely abandoned. The empire that had contested Egypt for control of Syria, that had signed the world's first surviving peace treaty, that had developed sophisticated legal codes and maintained extensive archives, it all disappeared within a few decades. The Hittite language itself ceased to be spoken. By the time classical Greek historians wrote about the ancient Near East, the Hittites had been forgotten so completely that when the Bible mentioned them, scholars assumed the references were mythological or exaggerated. It wasn't until the late 19th century that archaeologists rediscovered Hattusa and realized the Hittites had been real and powerful. Hittite texts from just before the collapse paint a picture of an empire under severe stress. Records document years of grain shortages. Letters reveal desperate attempts to import food from Egypt and other regions. There are mentions of military threats, internal unrest, and problems with subject peoples. The tablets break off abruptly. Whatever happened next wasn't recorded, or the records were destroyed. In Greece, the destruction was equally comprehensive and even more mysterious. The palace of Pylos in southwestern Peloponnese was destroyed around 1200–1180 BCE. The linear B tablets found there, preserved by the fire that destroyed them, mention hasty preparations for defense. Some tablets record allocations of bronze for weapon making. Others list men being organized into military units. One series documents coastal watchers, troops positioned along the shore to guard against seaborne invasion. They were expecting an attack, but the tablets don't tell us who the enemy was. They don't tell us whether the attack came from the sea or overland. They don't tell us if the defenders fought bravely or fled in panic. They just stop. The palace burned. The kingdom of Pylos ceased to exist. Mycenae itself, the city that gave its name to this entire civilization, suffered multiple destructions. An earthquake around 1250 BCE collapsed buildings and buried people in the rubble. The city was rebuilt. Then around 1190 BCE, it was destroyed by fire. It was rebuilt again, but on a much smaller scale. The grand palatial system was gone. Tiryns, with its massive cyclopean walls that still inspire awe today, fell around 1200 BCE. Thebes saw its palace destroyed. Orchomenos was abandoned. Gla, a massive fortified site in Boeotia, was deserted. Survey archaeology reveals that up to 90% of small sites in the Peloponnese were abandoned during this period. The population plummeted. People fled the palaces and coastal regions, perhaps seeking refuge in more remote, defensible locations. The destruction wasn't limited to Greece and Anatolia. In Cyprus, several major sites show destruction layers dating to this period, though recent research suggests the damage was less universal than once thought. In the Levant, cities faced varying fates. Some, like Hazor and Lachish in modern Israel, were destroyed. Others show continuity or less severe disruption. Even mighty Egypt, which survived when others fell, was severely weakened. Pharaoh Merneptah, around 1207 BCE, fought off an invasion that included both land and sea forces, some of the groups later called Sea Peoples. His successor, Ramesses III, faced multiple invasions in the early 12th century BCE. Ramesses III's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu contains dramatic reliefs depicting battles against invaders arriving by ship and land, with women and children in ox carts, suggesting these weren't just raiders, but displaced peoples seeking new homes. These wars drained the Egyptian treasury. The economy weakened. Tomb robbers began plundering royal burials, something unthinkable during Egypt's height. Workers at Deir el-Medina, the village of artisans who built royal tombs, staged what may be history's first recorded labor strike when their grain rations weren't paid. Egypt survived, but it was severely weakened, never again reaching the heights of the New Kingdom. By 1150 BCE, the damage was done. What followed was catastrophic. Writing disappeared. Linear B script vanished forever. Not just the script, the entire practice of writing administrative documents, keeping palace records, documenting transactions. In Greece, literacy dropped to effectively zero. Writing wouldn't return until the development of the Greek alphabet around 800 BCE, over 300 years later. That's longer than the United States has existed as a nation. Trade collapsed. The intricate networks that had connected 3 continents fell apart. International commerce essentially ceased. Pottery styles became local and provincial. Exotic imports disappeared. The Mediterranean world fragmented into isolated regions with minimal contact. Cities were abandoned. Of the great Mycenaean palaces, not one survived intact. Most were reduced to small villages or completely deserted. Populations concentrated in more defensible, often remote locations. Urban life, one of the hallmarks of civilization, largely disappeared from Greece. Population declined drastically. Estimates suggest the population of Greece may have dropped by 75% or more between 1200 and 1100 BCE. This wasn't gradual demographic decline. This was population collapse. Technology regressed. The sophisticated crafts of the Bronze Age disappeared. No more elaborate frescoes, no more intricate ivory carvings, no more monumental architecture. The specialized craftsmen who created these things were dead, scattered, or no longer supported by palace patronage. Their knowledge died with them. Political organizations simplified. The complex palace bureaucracies with their scribes and hierarchies gave way to simpler, village-based societies. Kings, if they existed at all, controlled much smaller territories. Central authority largely disappeared. In 1817, German historian Arnold Hermann Ludwig Heeren was the first to date the Bronze Age collapse to around 1200 BCE. He set off a detective story that scholars are still trying to solve today, over 2 centuries later. Multiple theories have emerged. Let's examine each suspect carefully, following the evidence wherever it leads. Suspect number 1, the Sea Peoples. For decades, perhaps a century, this was the prime suspect. The mysterious Sea Peoples, the faceless raiders from the sea who supposedly destroyed everything they touched. Egyptian records, particularly the inscriptions at Ramesses III's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, describe waves of invaders arriving by ship and land. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms. Who were the Sea Peoples? That's the maddening part. We don't really know. Theories about their origins range wildly across the map. Mycenaean Greeks displaced by catastrophe at home, migrants from western Anatolia, seafarers from Mediterranean islands, refugees from Italy or the Balkans, pirates and adventurers from anywhere and everywhere. Some scholars have even suggested they were Etruscans from Italy, though evidence for this is thin. Egyptian sources only describe them in battle. We have no accounts from the Sea Peoples themselves. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know their political organization. We don't know their motivations beyond seeking new lands and resources. Egyptian reliefs show them arriving not just with warriors, but with women, children, and ox carts laden with possessions. This suggests they were refugees and migrants as much as raiders, people displaced by disasters elsewhere, seeking new homes by any means necessary. Here's the crucial insight that modern scholarship has reached. The Sea Peoples were probably a symptom of the collapse, not its cause. They weren't a unified empire that decided to conquer the Mediterranean. They were desperate groups, displaced by drought, famine, political collapse, or local disasters, who banded together and attacked weakened states that could no longer defend themselves. They were both perpetrators and victims of the same systemic breakdown affecting everyone. As archaeologist Eric Klein puts it, the Sea Peoples have been set up as a scapegoat. They were as much victims as oppressors. Suspect number 2. Climate change and megadrought. Recent scientific research has revealed something remarkable. A severe drought struck the eastern Mediterranean from approximately 1250 to 1100 BCE, what researchers have termed a megadrought, potentially lasting 150 to 300 years in some regions. The evidence comes from multiple independent sources. The Sorek Cave in Israel contains a 150,000-year precipitation record that shows an unprecedented and steady decline in rainfall through 1150 BCE. Oxygen isotope ratios in the cave's stalagmites reveal that rainfall decreased significantly during this period. Pollen records from sites across the region show dramatic vegetation changes consistent with severe drought, with the period between 1200 and 850 BCE identified as one of prolonged aridity. Plants that require abundant water disappeared from the pollen record, replaced by drought-resistant species. Sea surface temperatures in the Mediterranean dropped significantly, between 2 to 4 degrees Celsius during this period, which would have decreased evaporation and thus reduced precipitation over land. Historical texts confirm the crisis. Letters from the Hittite archives document desperate grain shortages. The king of Ugarit writes to the king of Cyprus begging for food. "There is famine in your house. We shall all die of hunger." Think about what drought means for Bronze Age civilizations that depended entirely on agriculture. No rainfall means failed harvests, year after year mass starvation as food stores run out, economic collapse. No agricultural surplus to trade. Social unrest and rebellion as people struggle to survive, mass migration as populations flee. Affected regions, warfare over remaining resources and fertile land. The Hittite Empire was particularly vulnerable. Their core territory in Anatolia was already somewhat arid. Multiple years of drought would have been catastrophic. The archives from Hattusa document the problem explicitly. Years where the empire couldn't feed itself and desperately tried to import grain from Egypt and Syria. But here's the problem with drought as a sole explanation. Famines don't burn down palaces. Suspect number 3, earthquakes, the seismic storm. The eastern Mediterranean sits on active fault lines. Major earthquakes are common in this region even today. Some scholars have proposed that a series of related earthquakes, what geologist Amos Noor called an earthquake storm, struck the region over several decades, roughly from 1225 to 1175 BCE. Evidence includes archaeological destruction layers that show patterns consistent with seismic activity. Walls toppled outward, buildings collapsed inward, not the patterns you'd expect from fire or human attack alone. At Mycenae, one destruction layer contains crushed human bodies buried in collapsed buildings, clear evidence of earthquake damage. The geographic distribution of destroyed cities corresponds with known fault lines in the region. Noor and colleagues have mapped Bronze Age destructions against modern seismic data and found striking correlations. Earthquakes could certainly have destroyed cities. A major seismic event could have toppled the massive Cyclopean walls, collapsed palace roofs, and killed inhabitants. But here's the critical flaw in the earthquake theory. Throughout history, earthquake-damaged cities are typically rebuilt. After the Great Lisbon Earthquake of 1755, the city was rebuilt. After the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the city was rebuilt. After Kobe, Japan's devastating 1995 earthquake, the city was rebuilt. Modern examples abound. Unless something else prevents reconstruction, people return to important sites and rebuild. The Bronze Age cities weren't rebuilt. Something prevented recovery. Something kept people from returning to these important locations, from reconstructing the palaces, from re-establishing the political and economic systems. Earthquakes might have been part of the catastrophe, but they don't explain why recovery never happened. Suspect number 4. Systems collapse. The perfect storm. This is where modern scholarship has increasingly converged. Not a single cause, but a perfect storm of interconnected failures. Multiple simultaneous crises that created a feedback loop of disaster. The Bronze Age world was complex, sophisticated, and interdependent. Those were its greatest strengths and its fatal vulnerabilities. Consider the trade.
Networks. Bronze requires copper and tin. If tin couldn't reach the Mediterranean from Cornwall, Devon, or Central Asian sources because of drought-driven migrations, piracy, or political collapse, bronze production stopped. If Cyprus couldn't produce copper due to local upheavals, the entire eastern Mediterranean lost its primary metal source. If Egyptian grain shipments stopped, Hittite cities starved. The palace-based economy was incredibly centralized. Everything flowed through the palace: tax collection, food storage, military organization, craft production, religious life, trade networks. The palace was the hub of civilization. When palaces fell, whether to earthquake, invasion, internal revolt, or economic collapse, entire administrative systems disappeared. As historian Eric Klein explains, the complex systems that held the Bronze Age world together were not flexible. When they broke catastrophically. Additional contributing factors. Internal tensions. The Amarna letters from the 14th century BCE already document social problems. Banditry, conflicts between rulers and subjects, local authorities ignoring central commands. The system was under strain even during prosperity. Technological disruption. The transition from bronze to iron weapons may have destabilized traditional military balances. Iron deposits are more common than copper or tin. If lower-class soldiers could arm themselves with iron weapons, the aristocratic monopoly on bronze weaponry, and thus military power, would have been threatened. Over-specialization. The palace economies were rigid and hierarchical. When central authority failed, there was no flexible backup system. Local communities couldn't easily step in because they'd become dependent on palace redistribution. Possible epidemics. Some scholars speculate that diseases, smallpox, plague, or other epidemics, may have weakened populations, though direct evidence is limited. The cascading effect. A system's collapse. Here's how it might have unfolded. Prolonged drought reduces agricultural production across the region. Food shortages lead to famine, social unrest, and migration. Earthquakes destroy cities and disrupt trade infrastructure. Weakened states can't defend against raiders. Displaced populations, the Sea Peoples and others, attack vulnerable regions. Trade networks break down due to insecurity. Tin and copper can't reach bronze workshops. Without bronze, military equipment can't be produced.